and you are about to embark on the next Pioneer Knowledge Services Because You Need to Know, a digital resource for you to listen to folks share their experience and knowledge around the field of knowledge management and nonprofit work. If your company or organization would like to help us continue this mission and sponsor one of our shows, email byntk@pioneer-ks.org. We follow up with the second segment with Nick Milton, and we're going to dig a little deeper into the ISO for knowledge management, find out more about the why, where, and how that it all became and what it is to organizations today. Nick, let's talk about this. When did this all start for you? Because you said you were part of the planning of this whole thing.
Yeah, I was part of the team that developed the ISO standard. I think it goes back to, let me see now, is it 2014, I think it was. There was this request from the Israelis to put a knowledge management standard together. There used to be although it still is, there's a clause in ISO 9001 which requires anybody working a quality system to manage the knowledge within that quality system. That was not a KM standard. That was a quality standard with recognizing knowledge as an asset. But the Israelis in 2014 came up with a request that we should have a similar standard for knowledge management. And that was for three reasons. Firstly, an increasing understanding of the importance of KM. Secondly, ambiguity in understanding what KM actually is. And thirdly, multiple and common failures of KM projects and initiatives because people were taking incomplete approaches. You know, things like the technology-led approach, which we've known for years is not going to work, or the build a library of everything you know approach, which we know is not going to work. We thought that, or the Israelis thought that if we had a helpful standard, it would at least point people in the right direction and point them away from some of the most common pitfalls. So once that proposal was received, it had to go around to all of the ISO members, and ISO, practically every country in the world is a member of ISO. I think it's about 180 countries. And we got approval to go ahead. There were some countries were suspicious. Germany was not very keen on the idea, but they decided that if there was going to be a standard, they'd like to be involved in drafting it. We then, this must now be about 2015, it was agreed that we'd start work on this standard. Standards are written by working groups of experts drawn from the member countries. And these experts are not paid. They spend their time, they spend their travel expenses themselves because they think this is a worthy cause.
Okay.
And each of the experts reports back to a mirror committee in their own organization. In America, ANSI. In the UK, it's BSI. And so on. Every country's got one of these mirror committees. Various levels of draft are produced and they're cycled around these mirror committees for edit, review, and input. Everything is done face to face because the main philosophy behind an ISO standard is that we should have unanimous agreement.
Wow. That sounds difficult.
It is. It is difficult. And there was an awful lot of discussion.
Yeah, I bet. Who is the ringmaster that makes sure everybody? I just can't even, knowing the academic frameworks that I've worked in, I'm like, oh my good gosh, are you kidding me? 100%?
Now it's helped by the fact that there is a very well-defined template for a management system standard. So there's a limit to what you can change and what you can add. We could modify it for knowledge management, but ISO believe they know how things work, and they believe that they work through planning, checking, doing, acting, the simple PDCA model. So it took about 3 years to write this standard. Anybody could join any of the mirror committees. Anybody on the mirror committee could join the working group. It's entirely voluntary. And I was on the BSI mirror committee and I was on the ISO drafting panel. There came to a point, I think it was 2017, where we put a committee draft out for public review, and it was published on the internet, and we widely advertised it, and we got lots and lots of comments. Some comments were very helpful. Some comments required us to change things which we couldn't change. Some contradicted each other. Mm-hmm. So we had to do a bit of a juggling act. And some people, rather than using the comments reply form, sent a whole bunch of annotated text back, which was very difficult to deal with. Really, we're working through it paragraph by paragraph, and we want to say what are all the comments on this paragraph. But anyway, 2018, we had 3 days in Paris to take all of those comments and come out with a final draft. And that was what we came out with. That was what was published as ISO 30401:2018. Mm-hmm. And I've already talked about the 54 shalls that are within the document. The ISO standard is a type A standard, so it's one that you can measure against, and it's got those requirements in it. For example, the organization shall determine external and internal issues that are relevant to its purpose and that affect its ability to achieve the intended outcomes of its knowledge management system. Mm-hmm. To meet that, you'd have to have a list of issues that had been analyzed and so on. There are 10 sections in the standard itself, plus some appendices and plus an introduction. We wrote quite a long introduction because knowledge management needs a little bit of a lead in for anybody who's new to it. So we talked about some of the principles behind knowledge. We talked about some of the sister disciplines that go alongside knowledge management, like information management, like records management, which are adjacent but not identical. And then within the bookends of the introduction and the appendices is the body of the standard itself. Okay. The first 3 sections are informative. They have no shalls in there. But then you get to sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they tell you what you shall do. Firstly, you set the context. You determine what outcomes you want from KM. You determine who the stakeholders are and what their interests are. You determine what is the scope, both the organizational scope, but the knowledge scope as well. Mm-hmm, this is all really good stuff that every KM project should do. Yeah. All too often, we find projects that haven't done this homework, that have jumped in with, we've got this technology, how should we roll it out? Without saying, what outcome do we want? And who are the stakeholders? What do they want? And have we asked them? There's then a little bit about the dimensions of the framework, the fact that we have to look at codified knowledge on the one hand and uncodified on the other. Just as a side issue, we didn't use the terms explicit and tacit. I was
going to say, where did those terms fall out and why?
I tell you why, because people understand them in rather different ways. Lots of people, about half of the people that we've surveyed, think that explicit knowledge is the same as documented knowledge. The other half think that explicit knowledge need not be documented, but it's the things that you know, basically. You can explain. Explicit means can be explained. Mm. If we use the word explicit, half of the people are going to hear documents, and half of the people are going to hear, it could be documents, it could be in the heads. Could be. Yeah. So we use the terms documented and undocumented, or codified and uncodified, really, because you can store. It doesn't have to be a document. It could be
a smaller box. It's a smaller definitional box. You can't get lost too much from codified to not codified.
Exactly. Plus, it is the phase change in how you manage the knowledge, because it's the point at which the knowledge becomes decoupled from the head. Mm. Anything that is codified has now left its knower. Yeah. And can be managed by electronic means. Anything that's uncodified, you've got to find the person and talk to the person. 2 different styles of management. Until
we can get to the synapse access point where I could just plug in the brain and suck it.
Yeah, one day. Not yet. So that's that. We've got a little bit in there about culture, and this is where one of the big arguments came. Some people wanted a whole explanation about how you should be setting in place a KM culture. Other people said, no, it's too fuzzy a term. So what we've ended up doing is having one clause that says you shall demonstrate how you are addressing the cultural aspects, and then an appendix about ways in which you could do that.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're not telling people what to do. You're just saying you must have thought about it and you must have documented it.
That's probably a good way to go because, trying to get a prescription for a culture change or adaption
very tough.
Is pretty tough.
Yep.
I just asked because I've got it up here too because I'm very impressed with the document because I for two reasons. As a KMer myself, I thought, oh my gosh, this is finally going to put some authority behind what I feel KM can bring to an organization and what it should do. Because the ISO for me was going to be a foundational thing that pivots a lot of people away from, it's just a fad, it's just a blah, 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 and we're not going to do it, because it became more substantial with the ISO.
Yeah.
Is it being adapted too? And I think you said in your survey it's not really had a huge effect, but has it changed anything in the market?
I don't know, and I can't answer that yet.
Okay.
If I do another survey, I think I will be able to answer that. But I think what it does is it changes the focus. KM, knowledge management, most of us focus on the K. ISO 30401 focuses on the M. So it's approaching knowledge management from a different direction.
Okay.
And it's a direction that we seldom address. If you go and do a Google search for knowledge management process, knowledge management technology, knowledge management roles, knowledge management governance, you'll get loads of hits for process, loads of hits for technology, a few on roles and almost nothing on governance. ISO 30401 is 70% governance, 15% roles, a tiny bit on process and almost nothing on technology. Because ISO is not going to mandate what technology you use, it mandates the management framework that you set around it. And that's why I think, Edwin, this is revolutionary for many people because it's bringing half of the phrase, bringing the management of the phrase back into prominence.
Do you think it ever was in prominence? Wasn't the management piece always kind of the weak link in this?
Yeah, it was. Yes. If people write knowledge management, well, they're generally using a 48 font for the knowledge and a 10 font for the management. And we're trying to just expand that font a little bit. I mean, not literally, but
I like it. And there seems to be a good focus in this ISO about the leadership.
Yeah.
You say it's heavy to governance. It's heavy to setting up the how.
Yeah.
And that's been a weak link, I think. And even in my formal education of knowledge management at the master's degree level, the how was still not clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, I get it. And I see the vision. I see the light.
Yeah.
But I still don't understand the how. How do I do all this? So this ISO is the how, and it should be on everybody's shelf.
It's the how, and it's the how. The how starts with the leader, comes down through the policy, comes down then through delegated authority, comes down through plans and objectives, resources. The resources have to be trained. And then I think chapter 8 is about the operational processes that are applied. And then 9 and 10 are about how you review and improve the system going forward. So not only do you define the how, but you define how you're going to learn from operations and how you're going to improve the how. If people follow that philosophy, it's a much firmer way to go.
It has always been, here again, when I was so excited to hear that this was coming out, because there seems to be a bit of quicksand that most KM is operated on, and it's either personality base, somebody's a firecracker and they're doing stuff and blah, but it's always been, in my view, it's been a bit of a challenge to sustain resources for equal KM parts. And that's always been a challenge. And this gives, at least to the operator, to the KM operator, the owner of it in an organization, to start building a more sound foundation for that going forward, and to be part of that resource pull at the C-suite to say, hey, we need this stuff because. So it brings a lot of weight and gravity.
It's an unfamiliar document to many knowledge managers. So last year in the UK, we came up with a second standard, which is a guide to the ISO standard. It's a British standard 34401, but I think it's useful to anybody. For each of these 54 shalls, we give examples of how you might actually meet them. things you can think about, things you could do. It's got no shalls. It's not a requirement standard. It's an advisory standard. I'm pleased with that one. Again, I was on the drafting team for that one, and I think it fills a bit of a gap, a bit of a conceptual gap from the knowledge management world and the standards world.
So where is the biggest payoff?
The biggest payoff is starting your KM program in the right way and not hitting one of these blind alleys. The biggest payoff is knowledge management implementations that work and work in a sustainable way, that avoid the trap that you mentioned just now, the trap of personality, of the charismatic leader. And when the charismatic leader goes, everything collapses.
Exactly. Not a very good sustainment model.
No, or the chief executive whose baby it was,
right,
who then leaves and nobody wants the baby.
Yep, put him out. What's the best advice from Nick Milton for anyone that wants to know more about knowledge management?
Well, this is where I plug the book that I wrote with Patrick Lamb, because
just buy my book and you'll have all the answers. Is that what you're saying?
In a way, because like I said in the previous podcast, this is the book that I wish I'd had 20, 30 years ago, because it would have answered all of my questions. We deliberately wrote it in that format. And it's like a journey through knowledge management. It's a bit light on the strategy piece, because I wrote a previous book with Stephanie Barnes called Designing an Effective KM Strategy. So maybe you want to buy that one as well.
If they come armed with the ISO and your texts, there should be absolutely no reason they fail.
There should be no reason. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's all I needed to hear, because that's the first time I've ever heard any guarantee for KMers. So that's a helpful thing. Thank you.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. The next book is going to be a little bit more specific about the different contexts. In that one, you'll be able to see, okay, I'm a KMer in an NGO. What's it going to look like for me? But also, what does it look like in other contexts, and what can I draw from those other contexts?
Well, that's exciting. When's that coming out?
Next year, February, maybe.
All right. Well, we will definitely have you back on the show to talk about all of that as it kicks off. What's 10 years going to bring? What's 10 more years going to bring to the world of the formal sense of knowledge management?
Is that a question?
I'm asking you. Of course, you're the guru. You know stuff.
Yeah,
Come on.
I don't know the future. I think it can go a couple of ways.
Okay.
I think it can continue to be consolidated as a robust management discipline, or I think it can follow the various technological hype curves. And there's always that push for novelty in the tech world, because there's always some new technology that promises to completely overturn KM. First it was SharePoint, then it was enterprise search, then it was knowledge engineering, now it's ChatGPT. And these are all focusing on the 20% of the knowledge that's codified and documented, and the rest, the 80%.
Is the 80-20 still a valid number?
I don't know.
Even now? I know that's been a rule of thumb, but I don't know where it came from. So I'm just asking.
I don't know where it came from either.
I've seen it used everywhere, so I'm just curious.
I don't know.
What would you say it is now? What would you guess from your experience in all these surveys and everything you've written and read? What would your guess be?
I think it depends very much on what the sort of knowledge you're talking about. The sort of knowledge you're talking about, if it's knowledge of the Crimean War, then all of that is documented. If it's knowledge about how to combat COVID, it wasn't more than 2 years ago we had zero documented knowledge. Even now, I'm not sure that I think there are some reports going around in the UK. There's reports still being created about how the government handled COVID, but they will be so politically situationed that whether they'll be useful in the next pandemic or not, I don't know. It depends on the knowledge. Is it old static knowledge? Is it new continually evolving knowledge? If it's continually evolving, then maybe 95% of it is in the heads. If it's old static knowledge, all of it's in the books. You look at your context and you decide what is the balance. That'll vary by industry. For example, if you're writing customer manuals for Chevrolet Jeeps, that's pretty old knowledge, and you can write that all down. But if you are writing knowledge about how to build AI, I bet none of that's written.
All right. How does that feel?
Excellent. Okay. Right. Well, I guess we're pretty well done, aren't we?
Well, thanks for being here today, Nick. It's been a very enjoyable journey.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
If your company or organization would like to help us continue this mission and sponsor one of our shows, email bynt-ks@pioneer-ks.org. You have just finished our latest Because You Need to Know, a public service of Pioneer Knowledge Services. Please join us on LinkedIn and find us at pioneer-ks.org.